I'm really glad that quite a bit of my bio had been omitted because when people ask me, how did you ever get into the beer business, it's an interesting story to begin with. First of all, I'm a native of Wahpeton, North Dakota, and if you know where Wahpeton is, you've had to have a reason to go there because it's south of Fargo, about 45 miles. I'm also an alumni of the University of North Dakota, and we can't call ourselves Sioux anymore, so we're calling ourselves the Who because we have no name as yet. But when I left Grand Forks, I ended up with a degree in clinical social work, was trained in family therapy, and then, of all things, I specialized in working with adolescents and young adults who had substance abuse and addiction issues. So prior to starting the brewery, I worked in the CD field for about 8.5 years. Moved here in 1980 to work at St. Mary's Hospital in Minneapolis, which is now part of the University of Fairview system. And I worked my way up through the management ladder to where I was in charge of the evaluation unit of their adolescent chemical dependency program. So in the early 80s, I started to have a struggle. Certainly it's connected to my Scandinavian DNA. I have a lot of control issues, there's no question. But I also found myself stuck in a position of classic middle management where I had a lot of responsibility but no authority. And at that time, it was also in a Catholic hierarchy. And barely being a recovering Lutheran, it was a little bit difficult to deal with. So I started fantasizing, okay, what else am I going to do with myself? Thought about going to medical school, specializing in psychiatry. I'd look at these psychiatrists that I would fight with on a daily basis because usually I would interrupt their income. Because they would say, you know, this 16-year-old kid probably could benefit from treatment. And I would say, no, this 16-year-old kid has to go back to the family and go through some more life experiences before we build up a debt as big as someone's mortgage. So that fantasy kind of went off to the side. Thought about going into private practice, going back to graduate school, which essentially would be starting my own business. And just simply because of the fact that I was a beer drinker, and I've always been a beer drinker, and was identifying a void, so to speak, back in 1982, I thought, wouldn't it be great to start a brewery? And how popular would I be then? Everybody would socialize with me. So the last 2 years that I was at St. Mary's Hospital, I started doing part-time feasibility work. And back then, you know, the research was really pretty simple because there were only 11 microbreweries in existence in the US. Today there's about 3,500. So, you know, making trips to San Francisco, to Portland, to Chico, to Seattle, to Boston, to Albany, New York, was pretty easy. And also, all of my vacation time for 2.5 years when I was at St. Mary's, I would work at a little brewery. And one brewery that I apprenticed at was the William S. Newman Brewing Company in Albany, New York, and this guy was an Anglophile, and he was a bicyclist. So he would go from pub to pub, he and his wife. They came back, he was a part of the Department of Revenue for the state of New York. He went off and started this brewery, and this guy was such a purist that in 1982, 100% of his output was cask-conditioned English ales, which even today is just a very small part of the market. Well, Bill was more than a pioneer. You know, he didn't survive more than 4 years because he was such a purist that he insisted that everybody serve these casks without the pressure of CO2 and to have a proper temperature of about 50 degrees. And if you can imagine, and for some of you that have been around drinking beer since the early 80s, back in 1984-85, Moosehead was the largest selling imported beer in the state. Even in St. Paul, you would have to really search out Guinness on draft. There were 6 places that had Guinness. There may be a little bit of Bass Ale, and in the entire metro area, there were 2 draft lines of Anchor Steam when I was doing market research. So to say that the beer landscape was pretty homogeneous in the early 80s would be an understatement. And typically you would find places that had 6 to 8 draft lines. 90% were light beers. So obviously, working on the business plan, getting trained, I'm a strong advocate of mentorship. I had 2 master brewers as personal trainers and mentors. I started attending brewing school in Chicago, and that happened in '84 because, by the way, I lost my job at St. Mary's eventually. As it happens, the healthcare industry was going through some changes. And my position of being in charge of evaluating these kids that came on the unit merged with the head nurse's position. Very appropriate, because I had had the responsibility of clinical supervision of both nurses and counselors. But I had the opportunity to interview for a job that I'd done successfully for 4 years. And on that hiring panel was my former boss, who every time I turned in a vacation request, he would say, "What brewery are you going to this time?" And then the 2 psychiatrists I fought with. So they said, "Well, Mark, there's an opening in the family therapy team if you'd like to stay." And I said, "No, I think it's a sign to go." And I had a few years and just enough gumption to say, okay, I'm going to work on getting this brewery going full time in January of 1984. So that's when I started attending brewing school in Chicago. I also signed up for SCORE. I hope all of you know what that acronym is for. It's retired executives that provide business counseling through the SBA program. And I was very fortunate to have been assigned to a very tough individual who had had a beverage company in St. Paul, Gold Medal Beverage. His name was Jerry Mogul, and he was a tiger. He had a head for numbers and margins, and this was all pretty foreign stuff to somebody coming out of a therapeutic background. And in the meantime of working with Jerry, I was also trying to seduce stockbrokers because I needed to raise at least $700,000 to start this little venture. And after talking to a number of people, one fellow finally said, "You know, Mark, you know, this brewery deal that you're trying to do is pretty sexy. It's kind of a cool thing. But, you know, you're looking for $700,000, and actually I was looking for $200,000. The rest was going to be debt and savings and other stuff." And he said, "You know, I've got this medical technology deal over here for $15 million. And I make a living out of commission. And this medical technology thing I could probably sell in about 6 months, or it might take me 9 months to sell your deal because of your background. And what would you do if you were me?" I would say, "I would sell medical technology," is what I would do. So I found myself out on the streets looking for investors. Now, both of my parents were teachers, and my father was a vocational educator. He was a printer to begin with. He also owned a small county seat newspaper. My mother was an elementary school teacher, so I was not brought up in a business family environment. And I've never sat down and had a conversation with somebody, and after 20 minutes of talking, asking for a check of $10,000 before I leave their office. That was a pretty foreign experience to me. But Jerry says, what the hell, let's go out here and see if we can shake some money down. So for about 4 months, we had at least a half a dozen appointments. He would call up his old acquaintances. And when he called up Ken Mackey, who at that time was in charge of Dayton Hudson, and says, hey, Ken, what are you doing for lunch? Oh, damn, I'm sorry you got something going on. I'll just see you about 1:30. Is that okay? And we show up at Ken Mackey's office, and I'm right there with Jerry. I learned very quickly how to do a cold call and an elevator pitch. Ken was pretty surprised because Jerry says, hey, this is Mark. He's going to tell you why you're going to invest in a brewery. Then you could call somebody else like Solly Robbins and say, you know, I'm going to bring this knucklehead into your office, and I want you to really tell him what business valuation is all about. So before I even knew what it was like operating a business on a day-to-day basis, I got a 45-minute lecture on who the hell was I to come across and ask for money when I've just got a concept and I'm already valuing this business at $2 million. And on the way out, I was told, why don't you just go get a job? The first and only guy out of Jerry's group was an interesting guy, Leo. He had his own business down in St. Paul, retired. Well, he was just about to retire, but he was a former Marine, World War II and the South Pacific. So Leo was the first guy to invest. And after about 1,400 cold calls that ended up to about 600 face-to-face appointments, I found the first 20 people. And so when I started making calls to everybody, say, hey, we sold our stock. I can finally finish the SBA loan application at 13.5%. This was in 1985. And some people say, well, yeah, it's better than 18 or 19, which a few years previous to that was going on. So I called up Leo to say that, hey, you know, we hit escrow. We're going to move forward. And boy, did I get a blue streak on the other end of the telephone. And I said, well, Leo, why are you cussing so much today? I mean, you're demanding that you want your money back. Why is that? And he says, well, for crying out loud, I didn't think you were going to be able to do it. I just wanted to encourage you. You know, so it really is remarkable, first of all, that I was able to capitalize a business because after all, when you think of it, there was a huge credibility issue. Some knucklehead out of North Dakota moving to the Twin Cities in 1980 to work in a hospital to run a CD evaluation program, and then 4 years later wanting to start a brewery. And I was living in St. Paul at the time, and St. Paul's a pretty small town. And in fact, this whole metro area is very small. A lot of connections. So in most cases, when I introduce myself to somebody, they say, yeah, I've heard about you already. Well, we ended up doing a little bit of construction on 7,500 square feet of space on University Avenue, about a block and a half west of the Dubliner Bar, for those of you who know where that is. We were there for 12 years. There were 5 of us in the beginning. And even though my business plan had stated that we were going to self-distribute our beer to make that personal connection and relationship with our retail customers, I didn't quite know the beer business enough at that point in time to really understand that that became a necessity. Because there wasn't a beer wholesaler that would touch us with a 10-foot pole back in 1986. You know, we were not extreme brewers. We were a bunch of deviants. People had no idea what to expect. And, you know, for some of the beer drinkers, they would say, you know, Mark, why didn't you come out with something like Bass Ale, which was a pretty common imported English ale at the time? And I said, because that already exists. If you enjoy Bass Ale, go drink that. If you enjoy Miller Lite, drink that. If you enjoy Moosehead, drink that. We're something different. This is something that, from the ground up, is getting back to basics. Now, I could talk weeks on end about how we lost touch with our beer culture, which is definitely connected to Prohibition. We totally lost touch with types of beer that we'll enjoy during the day, through the week. There are seasonal beers. There are beers that are connected to maybe events within the community or the family of the brewery. And what had happened when Prohibition was repealed, the 70 breweries in the entire country that survived focused on a national market. And there was a very strong impetus and motivation to be as large as you could, as fast as you could, to scale up. And along with that scaling up and the engineering and everything else that was involved, and by the way, the brewers knew that they had to compete with sodas due to Prohibition. The beers became more carbonated. They also became a little bit more homogeneous because the brewmasters were getting beat up by the accountants because the accountants were saying, don't put any flavor in there that might offend somebody, because we need to seek this universal beverage that will appeal to almost everybody who can drink a liquid. And that's really what transformed beer in our society to where eventually by 1970 there were only 40 breweries in the US. And they all made very similar styles of beer. There may have been an Oktoberfest here or there, or a Bock beer here and there. But in terms of diversity, you could count the styles less than one hand of all the breweries that existed. So this truly has been a renaissance and a re-educational process with our society of getting people back to the basics, back to traditions. Brewing predates winemaking. The wine masters don't necessarily like to hear that. But in Egyptian tombs, there are specific hieroglyphics that not only have to do with the brewing process, but even the malting process of where you change this starchy seed of barley into a sugary kernel of malt. And the Egyptians had 12 styles of beer 9,000 years ago. So if you contrast that to 1970, we really lost a lot of traction through time. So really this whole idea of small-scale brewing, the reemergence of regional breweries that are specializing in flavors and pushing the envelope, so to speak, it's all about immersing ourselves with enjoying and experimenting and discovering new styles. And now it comes down to our own flavor preferences. Now, if I'm in a bar and I'm sitting next to somebody and they're drinking a Budweiser, who am I to beat that person over the head and say, what the hell are you drinking that for? I mean, that's a quick way to stop a conversation, right? You know, I mean, if he was drinking a pina colada, then we might have something to talk about. But you know, though this whole thing is that if somebody is enjoying beer, I would like to extend that conversation to where they feel a little bit more comfortable trying out other styles. Because one of the things right now today is that, this craft brewing segment only represents about 8% of total beer consumed. And for a small segment, it has a lot of volume. There are a lot of voices, there are a lot of opinions, there's a lot of people talking about what's good and what's best and what isn't, and what's hip and what's not. And it's an interesting mix of consumers. But before I get ahead of myself in the future, I should talk a little bit more about how University Avenue, before we left in 1998, we had 10 full-time and 15 part-time employees. And we were landlocked. We had gotten a lease to another building. And so we brought the capacity of that first brewery up to 34,000 barrels a year. And then we thought, okay, it's time to start all over again. And I looked around for 2.5 years at existing buildings, including the old Grain Belt Brewery was sitting empty, primarily in Minneapolis and St. Paul. When I looked at Grain Belt, we quickly came up with a number of about $85 a square foot to downsize the space and put smaller equipment in there. That's when we decided to build and look for open land. We ended up doubling that price. We went up to about $160 a square foot. But we ended up working with the Port Authority of the City of St. Paul. And at that time, the Port Authority was getting out of the hotel and restaurant business and having real estate back to their mission of supporting manufacturing in the East Metro area. And Lori Lauder at the time brought me out to this site area, which was a former site of a Texaco tank farm. And they had these mounds of earth that were piled up, and they were doing bioremediation. And this site, by the way, is above Shepherd Road, above the Mississippi, not too far from 35E. Kind of a neat location, but that site area scared the hell out of me. Because I thought, what are people going to think if we put a brewery or a food manufacturing plant over this old polluted site? But after looking at other places for another 1.5 years, I went back and started talking to Lori. I said, this is probably a pretty good idea. And by that time, the Port Authority had Texaco on the hook to where they entirely environmentally remediated this whole site area. And this was the first brownfield development that the Port Authority did. And since then, it's been about 14 other business parks of taking blighted urban property, returning them back to the tax rolls by offering this space to businesses. So we were a beneficiary of this first force in that we started with 4.25 acres of land that was set up with utilities to the curb, ready to build. We got that parcel for $1. It's a marvelous way for the city to retain jobs and businesses and promote growth within the city. Now, there isn't any other tax financing. We're totally back on the tax rolls. And we also had to guarantee that we were going to hire and add so many full-time positions over a period of time with a strong, healthy pay rate. So we built this brewery from the ground up, started construction in 1997, imported some antique equipment, a copper brew house from Germany. All of the other equipment was custom fabricated here in the state of Minnesota, all of our fermentation tanks. But in order to get that ball rolling, I was also on the street again selling stock. Now you'd think after 12 years, the credibility of the brewery by that time would have been pretty strong. This was back in 1995, 1996. We certainly had demonstrated ourselves in the marketplace. The distributors started calling us after our first year. We were selling quite a few barrels of beer, but financing is always tough. That never gets easier because it's a competitive environment. And also I had developed a sales technique of where I would give someone every reason why they should not do this and get involved in this business and really talk them out of it. Because after all, it is the beer business, it's not medical technology where there's a huge upside. The other thing about brewing is that it's incredibly capital intensive. Today we have $46 million invested in our land, building, and equipment to do 240,000 barrels. So it's real interesting. My banker always looks at me sideways when I tell her that I have a stainless steel fetish. And how the price tag of that, what that's all about. So today we have 90 employees. By the end of this year, we'll have 100. It's been 2 years, just within a couple of weeks now, it'll get really quiet because we've had 2 years of ongoing expansion and construction. Originally, when we moved into this brewery in '98, we had a capacity of 60,000 barrels. And then we'd grow incrementally because we would cash flow maybe $1.5 to $2 million worth of capital expenditures to either improve our technology or to add to our capacity. And so when we were hitting capacity, we would call up DCI in St. Cloud and say, hey, we need some more tanks. And then in 3 months, they would deliver those. And then another year after that would be ordering a few more. So where we got up to the point of, we're getting close to 120,000 barrels capacity a year, and then it was time to make another step. So in the fall of 2012, we broke ground on a new cellar, and we completed that project in September of 2013 to where we installed larger tanks. And this cellar also is one of the most modern in North America. It's 100% automated. You guys have to come and visit. And we doubled our capacity to 240,000 barrels a year. The construction shell can accommodate another 120,000 barrels expansion by putting in more tanks. A month after this project was completed, then we bought the property next door. Another 4¼ acres with an existing 40,000 square foot building. We utilized the warehousing space immediately because we had been having off-site warehouse leasing. And then we worked on installing a can line, which we did in May. And now we're finally getting done with all of the remodeling of the office areas because in 2 weeks, the administrative, finance, sales, and marketing teams will be migrating to the second building in some new digs. I mean, our overhead is really loaded. I've got 3 people in marketing working under a stairwell. I share my space with Damian McCann, our head brewer. I've got 2 people in logistics working in a hallway. But it's, having conversations are pretty challenging right now. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm surprised I can actually form a sentence and make a little bit of sense considering how the pace of things lately. So we've not only doubled our capacity, but we've also doubled our physical footprint. So I'm really happy about the position that we are in for future growth. Now, something about the company, I mentioned that we have investors. We're a privately held Minnesota corporation. The past 10 years, we started an employee stock purchase plan where once an employee is with us for 3 years, they're able to buy stock, so many shares based on their tenure and level of compensation. They can buy stock, so many shares on a discount of book value. If the employee leaves, we'll redeem that at book value at least. One of the things I firmly believe is that it goes all the way down to anybody on the production floor, that when you have this sense of ownership and when we're all making something for a living and making something that people enjoy, it's serious work, but also it's a lot of fun. But any way that we can add to that level of experience of ownership is very important. We've also been practicing open book management for 12 years, which a lot of small businesses don't do. And sure, you know, and now with the competitive environment that breweries have today, it's even a little bit more risky to project quarterly financial statements to everybody in the organization. And if somebody starts, they're a new employee with us and they're operating some type of packaging equipment, and if they've never seen a balance sheet or an income statement before, we take time to explain how all of this fits with a case of beer. 22% of our cost is packaging. And if we can shave 0.25% or 0.5% or 1% off from that, that makes a huge difference. So when we're also talking about financial realities and the realities of adjusting equipment so that it's not destroying packaging, or that we do more sampling in the front end to make sure that the supplier sent us the proper specs, we can take care of our downtime and waste. And it all goes back to working together. Because something that hasn't changed since 1986 when we started up is that we're still competing with the big boys. And these big boys are very global today. They have huge resources to the point of where we cannot imagine. And in order for us to compete on the street, we have to work very closely together. If you were to ask me, you know, what do I get concerned about today? Distribution is one. When you think about it, we have 3 layers of customers. We have the beer distributor, and the beer distributor is our first customer. We have to make sure that those folks are happy. And believe me, that's a challenge. Even when the relationship is profitable, they may not be happy. Because they're also responding to another 100 suppliers and a few other ones that happen to be pretty large, that they want their constant attention. And the reality is that there are 40% fewer beer distributors in the state of Minnesota today than when I started the business. These distributors have consolidated, their territories are bigger, and their portfolios are deep. And the last thing we want to do is to start a relationship with a lot of bitching and moaning and complaining. We have to figure out how to be profitable and more fun than the other dudes, and be effective on the street. So out of these 90 employees, not counting the brewery ambassadors that are doing tours and everything else, 24 other people are involved in sales, direct sales and marketing and social media. So we'll go out and hit the streets, make sales calls, add to our and build our success, and then give them a big hug and let them be the beneficiary of that. The next tier of customers are all of the retail customers. We have to work directly with all of the liquor stores and the restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. And sometimes that's a problem, because if there's a delivery issue or something else on the distribution side that we may not have control of, we have to overcompensate somehow. Finally, we get to the beer drinker. And boy, that's really shifting. And it really is amazing in a lot of ways that Summit Brewing Company has already crossed a generation and that we're still relevant. And a part of that relevance is the fact that, like any other relationship in business or just personal relationships, being dependable, reliable, meeting someone's expectations because they know who you are. These are words for consistency, which is a high value in the beer world. That's something that we've demonstrated over 29 years, and something that we will continue to build on. We've invested more and more money in quality control and quality assurance, because when we're putting beer in 24 million bottles, we have to do a lot of sampling to make sure that that beer meets our expectations. Now, with the insurgence of new brewers, it's been almost one a week, it seems. And all of these folks are dreamers. I know what that's like. I also understand very deeply, from a technical point of view, how difficult it is to make that same glass of beer time and time again. And also the fact that, someone may be an award-winning home brewer, and they may have a pretty dandy recipe, but they have to verify what goes into the bottle. And it's just not a sensory experience of saying, okay, this batch tastes pretty good, I guess we'll sell it. Particularly when your volume and your sales continue to increase, you have more relationships and more people that are relying on that trust. So, there are some beers out there that say, hey, this is a real great IPA. It has 90 international bittering units in it. And for those of you, if that doesn't make sense, it's totally cool, it's all right. It's just a measurement. But then we'll buy these beers and take them to our lab, and it turns out there's only 60 in there. Now, is that brewer a liar? No. It's just that they're not following through and verifying what it is they're doing. And so some people ask me today, hey, are we hitting a saturation point? I mean, certainly most of the small brewers that are starting up, they're focused more on the retail business of where they can sell more and more beer on the premise of their brewery with all of the tap rooms and with the restaurants. Now, that's a valid business plan, and you may have some control on that level. But when you start shipping beer to distributors and you're going out of state in other areas in a part of the region, it's very important that you understand food manufacturing practices. And then I could talk about Osseo or a whole bunch of other stuff too. This has been a real amazing journey. It doesn't seem like it's been 31 years. And I'm certainly not looking to sell. We're not talking to the big breweries. We're not talking to these equity bankers that would like to sleep with us for 3 years and turn the books and move on. We're going to stay fiercely independent and locally owned and just have a heck of a lot of fun keeping other competitors honest as we make great beer. So I'll take some questions. Is that fair enough? Oh, while you're thinking about it, I'm going to get some water. Yes?
I like your True Brit. Is that a new beer, or did you rename that from an old beer?
Ah!
And do you have an opinion on Total Wine coming into the market? Do you like them or not like them, or can't you maybe offer an opinion?
I'll offer an opinion and not be so damn diplomatic about it. First of all, True Brit has been around since 1995. It's an India Pale Ale, or what people always say, an IPA. Now, I've gotten emails at 4 a.m. saying, what the hell is your True Brit or your IPA all about? It's not really an IPA. Where are the hops? It's not at all what I expected. The beer sucks. and so I take the time to respond to these emails, even though it was composed at 4 a.m., and you kind of have an idea of what was going on. And so I patiently educate this person. Look, I'm really sorry, because obviously you've expected a West Coast American IPA style that's full of Cascade hops and grapefruit aroma and, hops that just never stop. And the True Brit is closely connected to the tradition and heritage of British ales, to the point of where we use a British hop, East Kent Golding, which is very earthy and soft when you compare it to some of the other hops that an American IPA is noted for. Originally, the name of that beer, and we haven't changed it much, we've tweaked it, and we tweak our beer all the time, and we're looking for ways to improve our beers that even is not perceptible to the consumer. But we christened it True Brit 2 years ago to really dial in the heritage so that somebody gets their expectations in line. Because if you got a newer drinker and most of their experience has been IPAs, they're going, oh, another one I can find out about. And it just is not as intense as what they would like, because it's different, it's very authentic. Total Wine and Spirits is, it's going to be interesting to watch. The other issue besides distribution that concerns me as far as future growth is governmental regulation and the level of excise taxes on beer. And I've already had 4 meetings at the Capitol as of this week, getting my face around there, getting acquainted with new people, making reacquaintances. Because one of the things that, I talked about, packaging is 22% of our cost. Excise taxes on beer is 8.5%. Now, excise taxes on beer, it's a manufacturing tax. We have to incorporate that into our cost when we sell our beer to a distributor. And very few people and all the beer drinkers don't realize how heavily beer is taxed and how much we contribute. And we're talking about $3.5 million and growing over the years that go to federal and state treasuries. 2 sessions ago, under the guise of it's a dime a drink tax, as if this is collected on the retail level, there was a bill that would increase our excise taxes on beer 600%, from $4.60 a barrel to $27.75 a barrel. That would bring up our excise taxes up into 16% of our cost. Labor is 11%. Raw materials are 14%. But it's only a dime a drink. And I'm really putting this imprint out there because that has been the spin that's been used for about 5 years now, and you'll see it again. That's a huge cost. So those are the 2 challenges. But the competitive environment and having Total Wine and Spirits come into the marketplace, they shake things up with pricing. They're certainly looking at volume. But volume really is nothing new. I mean, we have a beer at Costco, for example. But all of these customers that we have, there's this notion that we're really cutting our prices real deeply for the big box players, which is not true. I wouldn't be standing here talking to you guys if we were eroding our margins. I remember years back where we would be into the liquor stores and some great customers, and they might have 2 or 3 stores, or it might be just Surdyk's as a standalone unit, and they'll say, how much is it for a pallet of beer? And we say, same price. And it wasn't until we got past 75,000 barrels that we could actually do something with a pallet, but we also don't do things on an ongoing basis to where we're also not taking care of the little guys like Sherritt's Liquor Store on the corner of University and Raymond, who have been longtime customers. So there's this mythology in the beer business that what you lose on your margins you make up in volume. Well, you still lose money, I think. It's kind of a linear equation, I believe. So there's the perception. And John Wolf, who has Liquor Boy, and he likes to dial our 12-packs in there as a way to entice people to come in the door. That's his business plan. I mean, legally, I can't tell John, really you should put $1 more on that. I really think that service for the smaller operations will continue to have them survive and grow. I live in St. Paul, not too far from the cathedral, and there's some small family liquor stores that I go to and frequent, and that will continue. But it's going to change a little bit on pricing and this perception of value. And the perception of value on the retail side goes back to that relationship. So that's my answer. I don't know if it was too diplomatic. Sunday sales, I think it's going to happen eventually. I mean, it's what the consumers want. But, I lost $40 on a trip to Duluth where I was betting with my one of the guys on our sales team that I was saying, I bet Kenny up in Lake Superior Liquor Store just off from downtown, I bet he wants to be open on Sundays, and I was dead wrong. He says, no, I don't want to work on a Sunday. People want to go to Superior, that's their problem. If they can't plan ahead, that's their problem. So, I mean, the whole, the retail group, they're really a house divided. You need someone else?
We probably have time for one more question.
Oh dear, I'm talking too much.
No, I saw a few more hands up in the air earlier. How many states are you in now?
Oh, thank you. I probably should have talked about that a little bit. We're barely in 16. And please go to our website, check it out. Please come and visit, sign up for a tour. 89% of our sales are still in the state of Minnesota. And about 72% of our sales are in the metro area. I like to say we sell beer in Wisconsin just to tease them. That's about 3% of our sales, as well as North Dakota. And if you throw in Iowa and Chicago, that's about 98% of our total sales. We have beer down in Dallas, Fort Worth, and it just has to do with different relationships with different distributors that really want us. But it's problematic because whatever territory we're at, we have to have this distribution agreement and contract. And it's about 45% draft beer and 50% bottled beer and 5% canned beer. Cans, by the way, we got into that not because we thought it was cool and groovy. We thought we'd better get into that market because it opens new business for us. There are golf courses, there are public venues. There were people that were waiting. There are people waiting for us to put our beer in the cans, and they're buying other brands. And we expected a lot of cannibalization with our bottled beer, and it was really a tiny amount. The other reality is a defensive strategy in that there's only 2 companies today that make a glass beer bottle. And we happen to be a customer of the company that has 70% market share, which isn't really a comforting position to be in. So the cans, the option of another package can keep these glass guys a little bit more honest. You guys have been very kind. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.